She sipped a glass of wine, looked me straight in the eyes, and said something that froze my blood. In that moment, I knew something was terribly, terribly wrong. But what I never could have imagined was that my life was about to change forever. My name is Evelyn. At 72 years old, I should have been enjoying my golden years, sitting beside my husband on our worn out porch swing, laughing at his terrible jokes, feeling his warm hand squeeze mine like he'd done every day for 34 years. But he was gone, and the silence he left behind was unbearable. The house felt like a tomb. His coffee mug still sat by the sink, his slippers tucked under our bed like he might come back any minute. I couldn't bring myself to move them. Nights were the worst. I'd reach for him in the dark, my fingers grasping at empty sheets, and the pain would hit me all over again, sharp, suffocating, like my heart was being ripped straight out of my chest. I don't know how I would have survived without my friend Marianne. She didn't just call, she showed up at my door with food I couldn't eat and held me while I sobbed into her shoulder. She dragged me out of bed when I couldn't move, forced me to take walks, made me say his name out loud when the grief threatened to drown me. He loved you too much to let you disappear, she'd say. I met Marianne about 35 years ago at the town summer fair. One of those golden late summer afternoons that smelled like kettle corn, fresh cut grass, and childhood. We both lingered near the pie contest, though for very different reasons. I was pretending to study a blueberry crumble like I had any business judging its texture. She, on the other hand, didn't pretend at all. With the confidence of someone who'd been getting away with trouble her whole life, Marianne snuck a forkful the moment the judges turned their backs. Try this, she said, half whispering, half laughing, as she shoved the stolen bite in my direction. Her eyes were dancing, bold, amused, fearless. Absolute garbage. We should enter next year and teach them what real pie tastes like. I remember blinking at her, stunned not by the crime, but by the spark. She had that kind of presence, the kind that turned ordinary days into origin stories. It feels like a lifetime ago now, a different world, a different me, and maybe a different her. Neither of us had kids, just two white picket fence houses, 3 streets apart. Mariane's place looked like it had been gently swallowed by a wildflower jungle, poppies, daisies, lavender, all tumbling over the sidewalk like they didn't care about property lines. Mine was stricter, pruned within an inch of its life, with Richard's rose bushes lined up like little soldiers. He claimed he hated tending them, but I never once saw him skip a Saturday. He used to joke that Marianne's yard looked like Mother Nature sneezed on it and that ours was the last civilized property before the forest took over. Every time a new bloom crept toward the curb, he'd grumble, "The invasion has begun," but he always said it with a smirk and a pair of clippers in his hand. Deep down, I think he loved her chaos as much as we did. We built our friendship the old-fashioned way, over gossip, dirt under our nails, and far too much wine. Her porch swing became sacred ground. We'd sit there for hours, barefoot and half sunstroke, sipping whatever red was on sale, solving the world's problems one mosquito bite at a time. One summer, I decided to teach her how to count tomatoes. A noble goal, a total disaster. She brought wine to the lesson. Big mistake. We ended up elbow deep in tomato guts, laughing so hard I nearly dropped a boiling jar on my foot. Most of the jars cracked, 3 exploded, and one mysteriously vanished. We blamed raccoons. In the end, we had exactly one usable jar of sauce, which she labeled Survivor 97 inches and refused to eat on principle. But that was Marianne. She turned even failed tomatoes into a victory. Being around her felt like exhaling after holding your breath all day. She wasn't just a friend. She was my co-conspirator, my soft landing, my person. She was the one who introduced me to Richard. Met some cocky engineer at the hardware store, she said. Told him you'd crush him at poker. Be at mine Friday and wear that red dress you love. I did. He lost spectacularly, and I couldn't help but laugh as he shook his head in disbelief. 2 years later, he built that porch swing. The same swing beneath the trees where Marianne raised her glass and gave us her blessing. To Evelyn, she said softly, eyes shining, finally finding someone who argues with her just as much as I do. I'll never forget that day. That moment wasn't just a toast. It was a quiet promise, a bond sealed between us. For over 30 years, Marianne wasn't just my friend. She was my anchor, my living history. She never married, and her relationships were brief but fierce, blazing with a passion few could match. When Richard was away on work trips, Marianne would show up at my kitchen door late at night, pancake batter in hand, knowing I was restless and couldn't sleep. She was there, steady, unshakable, in the quiet hours when the world felt heavy. When Richard surprised me with that old antique writing desk, now quietly gathering dust in our bedroom, Marianne was right there, hauling it up the stairs despite her constant grumbles about romantic fools and the ridiculously heavy furniture. And in Richard's final, hardest days, when infection was taking hold and hope was fading, Marianne stayed by our side without a moment's hesitation. She gave us strength, comfort, and a fierce love that held us up when we could barely stand. She was more than a friend. She was family. But life has a way of testing us again, even when we think we've endured enough. It started so quietly, almost like a whisper. A cough here, a dizzy spell there. Things small enough to ignore, or so I thought. I told myself it was nothing. I've always been strong, always bounced back. There was no way I was going to let a few little aches ruin my mornings or keep me from the book club where laughter and stories kept me alive. But the cough, it didn't stop. It grew deeper, harsher, a dry, hollow sound that echoed in the silence of the night and stole my sleep. Every night I lay awake listening to it, afraid. One day I was having coffee with Marianne when suddenly I started coughing uncontrollably. Then came the blood. Red stains, bright, cruel, on my handkerchief. My heart sank like a stone, and the room seemed to tilt beneath me. I tried to hide it, to pretend it wasn't real, but Marianne saw right through me before I could even speak. Her eyes held a worry I couldn't face. I was terrified. I knew deep down that this was something I couldn't fix with stubbornness or willpower. Something was very, very wrong. Marianne was visibly shaken by what she saw. Her gaze, usually laced with sarcasm and lightness, turned serious, deeply concerned. Without hesitation, she insisted I go to a clinic right away for a medical evaluation just to understand how bad it really was. She told me about a small, discreet clinic she knew, almost hidden, where I could be examined quickly, without red tape or endless waiting rooms. A place where the truth stood bare, without distraction or delay. She promised it was just for an evaluation, nothing more. She wanted to shield me from fear, but she also knew we couldn't ignore what was happening. That day, the weight of it all fell on us like a stone. The silence inside the clinic was suffocating, broken only by our breathing and the soft chime of the door as it opened and closed. The doctor, calm but grave, examined me with eyes that seemed to see past the surface. That moment wasn't just a checkup, it was the beginning of something else, something frightening and painful. And Marianne was there, steady as ever, ready to hold my hand and face whatever came next. The doctor ordered some tests right away. My blood was drawn that same day by a nurse who gave us a look I'll never forget, quiet, knowing, worried, as if she already understood the urgency we hadn't even spoken aloud. We went back home feeling slightly more at ease, but the weight of uncertainty still pressed on our shoulders. The doctor had prescribed medication to ease the coughing, and that night the fits did lessen, but the blood didn't stop. It was still there, bright, terrifying. The next morning, everything changed. The doctor called Marianne directly. His voice was urgent, firm. We had to return to the clinic immediately. No waiting, no delays. When we arrived, the air felt heavier than before, as if the walls themselves already knew. Dr. Helbert met us with that same grave calm in his eyes. He didn't sugarcoat it. My condition was extremely serious. We had to begin an aggressive treatment right away. And then he said the words that tore through me like a blade. Stage 3 lung cancer. It hit me like a bomb. The world collapsed around me for the second time in my life. I couldn't think. I couldn't speak. My breath came short, like the room was shrinking. And if Marianne hadn't been right there, holding my hand, grounding me, I honestly don't know what I would have done. Dr. Helbert explained that conventional hospital treatment would be prohibitively expensive. And since I didn't have health insurance, the cost would be staggering. But there was another option. The treatment could be done at home. It was the smallest sliver of light in a room quickly darkening. Thank God Richard had left me financially secure. After his death, I received a life insurance payout of just over $6 million. I hadn't fully understood what that meant at the time. I had never really thought I would need it. But now I did. Even then, I didn't fully grasp the gravity of what was happening. My head was pounding, swollen with fear, uncertainty, disbelief. And there was Marianne, always Marianne, still holding my hand, still by my side, still holding me together. Then the doctor said he would personally take care of all the arrangements, everything I'd need to begin treatment at home. Medications, equipment, monitoring, he would oversee it all to make sure nothing fell through the cracks. He also told us that Sandra, the same nurse who had drawn my blood for the initial tests, the one with the quiet, knowing eyes, would be the one assisting me at home. She would come regularly, working under his direct supervision to ensure I received the care I needed. There was something reassuring in the way he spoke, calm, precise, unshaken. It gave me a thread to hold on to, just enough to believe that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't entirely powerless. But the real anchor in that moment was Marianne. She hadn't let go of my hand since the diagnosis. Her grip was steady, warm, present. I could feel the weight of her love in it, the kind of love that doesn't run from pain but walks straight into it with you. When we left the clinic, silence hung between us, but it wasn't empty. It was heavy, filled with everything we didn't need to say out loud. Back at home, as I sat on the edge of the bed staring at the floor, she put the kettle on like it was any other day. Then she came back into the room, leaned against the door frame, and said softly but firmly, "I'm not going anywhere. I'm staying here for as long as it takes." We're going to face this together. And just like that, I wasn't alone. The days kept passing, and despite the seriousness of what I was facing, Marianne's presence was like a light at the end of the tunnel. With her by my side, I truly believed I was going to survive this. It felt like just another one of those cruel chapters life insists on throwing our way when we least expect it. Within a few days, everything I needed for treatment was already set up in my home. Machines, medications, paperwork, instructions, all of it around me. All of it terrifyingly real. I was still coughing. There was still blood. The pain came in waves, forcing me to curl up in bed in silence. But even so, something inside me kept hoping, kept believing that with time, the treatment would start working, that this would all pass. Despite the pain, I was lucky I didn't experience the most feared side effects. No intense nausea, no recurring fevers. And most importantly, my hair stayed. That had been one of my biggest fears. I'll admit it. I was afraid of losing it, of looking in the mirror and not recognizing myself anymore. But the days kept going, and it stayed steady, as if whispering to me, not yet. We're not done. I was weak, yes. My body was tired, my lungs in turmoil, my spirit worn thin. But at the same time, there was something strangely beautiful about those days. Because I had Marianne. She was my relief, my comfort, my anchor. She cared for me with a kind of sacred patience and gave me exactly what I needed most, her presence. And that is worth more than any medicine. My room had turned into a hospital. Every corner, every piece of furniture, every sound, everything now carried the weight and care of a survival routine. Marianne was always there, attentive, helping Nurse Sandra keep to the schedule. At exactly 7 a.m., it was coffee time. She prepared my cup with the same care as always and placed it in my hands as a gesture of love and defiance. She knew how much I'd always loved coffee. She made sure to keep that piece of who I was before all this. I felt dizzy, a little nauseous, and had the strange feeling that the coffee wasn't helping me at all. But Marianne reminded me with that calm, steady look that maybe it was just my weak body trying to relearn how to function. At 9 a.m., it was time for vitamins, the only thing keeping me going, really, since I could barely eat anymore. At noon, it was usually a portion of protein with some vegetables, but I had no appetite at all. And most days, I could barely eat a single bite. At 3 p.m. came the injections. At first, they burned like fire. They really hurt. But over time, my body got used to them. They were no longer the torment of those first days, though they still left their mark. At 5 p.m., it was pill time. So many pills that I stopped counting. Counting only made me more anxious, so I took them one by one, in silence, trying not to think too much. At 7 p.m., it was always soup or a protein shake, but most of the time, I couldn't eat. I didn't feel hungry, and I was still full from breakfast. And at 8 p.m., that was the moment I looked forward to the most, the tranquilizer. The relief, the chance for a few hours of deeper sleep without coughing, without pain. 1 month of treatment passed, and although the road ahead was still long, something inside me, a stubborn thread of hope, gave me strength to keep going. I was not alone. And no matter how hard all of this was, there was still a will to move forward. Life went on, even if I could no longer keep up with its pace like before. The bills kept coming, relentless, as if nothing had changed. but everything had. I no longer had the strength or clarity to deal with the everyday things. Credit card statements piled up without me noticing. Overdue payment notices confused me. Even the simple act of opening mail felt like an impossible task. It was as if my financial life was slipping through my fingers and I couldn't hold on to any of it. Once again, Marianne stepped in like an angel sent by God. She saw the chaos before I could admit it myself. And with that quiet sensitivity only she had, she offered to help. And I handed everything over to her. Not out of weakness, but out of trust. Complete, unwavering trust. On top of caring for me, managing the treatment schedule, talking to doctors and nurses. Now she also took on the burden of my finances. She paid bills, organized papers, renegotiated deadlines. I gave her full access. Banks, cards, contracts, and she never once hesitated. At that moment, I simply wasn't capable of managing any of it, and she became everything. Like in a film, Marianne was the silent director of my life. She adjusted the lights, arranged the scenes, cleaned the stage, and held my hand between takes. She kept everything running behind the curtains while I did my best to keep existing at the center of the story. The days kept passing, and it was becoming more and more common for me to feel dizzier than the day before. Maybe it was the medication finally working its way through my body, fighting, in its quiet way, to heal that terrible illness. But there was something strange about this dizziness. It wasn't fading. On the contrary, it was growing day by day, like a heavy fog tightening its grip around me. That night, as Nurse Sandra administered my usual sedative, I could have sworn I saw Marianne standing at my bedroom door. She was just there, motionless, watching me, her eyes filled with something I couldn't quite read. Maybe it was sadness or just exhaustion. I turned my head slowly, caught between surprise and relief. Marianne, "No, ma'am. You're alone tonight." Marianne left at the last minute. Sighed she needed to help a friend who was in a car accident. My heart gave a strange, heavy thump. "What friend?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, though the room was already spinning. We've always had the same circle of friends, and I'd certainly like to know who was in an accident. Sandra paused a second too long, then shook her head. She didn't say. Just got a call and left in a hurry. Only said it was urgent. I tried to make sense of it, but the sedative was already washing over me like a warm, heavy wave. My eyelids grew heavy. The dizziness wasn't coming in waves anymore. It was a whole sea pulling me under, slow and steady. The last thing I remember, before everything went dark, was that silhouette in the doorway, motionless, watching me in silence. The next morning, I woke up disoriented. My head was heavy. My thoughts scrambled as if the previous night had been a dream or a hallucination. The image of Marianne standing in the doorway was still vivid in my mind, far too clear to be just a trick of the imagination. With a weak voice, I called out to Sandra. "And Marianne?" I asked, trying to sound casual, though my heart tightened in my chest. Sandra, while arranging the medicine vials beside the bed, answered calmly, "No, Mom. She hasn't returned since she left last night. said she was going to help a friend in an accident, and I haven't heard from her since. She said it like it was just another passing detail. But for me, it was a confirmation. I hadn't dreamed it. I hadn't imagined it. Marianne really had left. She truly wasn't here last night. So what did I see? That figure in the doorway. The way she looked at me. The silence. It had felt too real, too intense. I said nothing, but inside, the unease was growing. A strange sense that something wasn't right, like a puzzle piece in the wrong place in a picture I thought I'd known by heart. Something was wrong. And for the first time since my treatment began, I started to feel afraid. Not of the illness, but of something else entirely. Something deeper. That morning, for the first time in what felt like forever, Marianne wasn't there to bring me my coffee. Instead, it was Sandra who entered my room right on schedule, holding a tray with my usual cup of coffee and a sausage muffin, just the way Marianne used to prepare it. A simple gesture, but suddenly it felt heavy with absence. You can leave it on the nightstand, I murmured, trying to sound casual. I'll have it in a minute. She nodded politely and placed the tray beside me. I need to run over to Dr. Halbert's clinic, she said. One of your medications ran out, and I'll be back before 9 to give you your vitamins. I nodded again. She turned and left with her usual composed stride. I listened as the door shut behind her, the sound sharp, final. Something wasn't right. I could feel it in my bones. I forced myself to get out of bed. My legs trembled, but the dizziness I'd been drowning in for days wasn't as strong that morning. It was as if my body was finally waking up from something deeper than illness. I made my way to the bathroom, tray in hand. I poured the coffee down the sink and let the water run for several minutes, trying to erase every trace of its scent. The muffin I flushed down the toilet without hesitation. I returned to the bedroom slowly, every step heavy, but my mind oddly sharp. I considered calling Marianne. Just hearing her voice might have eased something inside me, but something strong and unexplainable stopped me. No, not yet. For the first time in weeks, I walked beyond the confines of my room and into the living room. The air felt different there, thinner, tense. That's when I noticed it. Richard's photo, the one in a gold frame he'd chosen himself, was missing from the console table. And the old shadow box frame that held my grandmother's pearl necklace, an heirloom I treasured, was gone too. My blood ran cold. I returned to the bedroom in silence, my heart racing. I carefully lay back down, placing the untouched tray back on the nightstand. I left the empty cup and crumbs there, as if I had eaten, but inside everything had changed. A question, quiet but relentless, echoed in my mind. Was Sandra doing something to me? Could she be involved in Marianne's disappearance? The fear that had once been about my illness was slowly evolving into something else. Suspicion. And for the first time, I was ready to find out the truth. Sandra returned and asked if I'd heard any news from Marianne. I told her No, not a single word so far. Something felt off, deeply off. There was a heaviness in my chest I couldn't shake, a whisper in the back of my mind that something wasn't right. I decided I'd call Marianne as soon as I had the chance. I asked Sandra where my phone was. She replied calmly. It ran out of battery. I told her I wanted it charged, said I wanted to play a game, something to pass the time, to distract myself while I could still stay awake. It was true, mostly. But what I really wanted was to call Marianne. Sandra nodded, said she'd take care of it. Not long after, she returned with my vitamins. I told her I'd take them in a bit, but she insisted kindly, but firmly, that I take them right then. It's important, she said, looking me straight in the eyes. Fear twisted in my stomach, but I smiled, nodded, pretended everything was fine. Even though I didn't want to, I took the pills. And I smiled through it, like I didn't feel the panic rising just beneath the surface. I felt weak, but surprisingly less dizzy. Maybe because I hadn't had coffee that morning. The fog that had clouded my mind was starting to lift, and I could think with a bit more clarity. But Marianne was still nowhere to be found. No messages, no calls. It was as if she had simply vanished into thin air. Sandra, on the other hand, was always around, always watching. There was something off about her, an unsettling feeling I couldn't shake. She rummaged through my things when I wasn't looking, and her eyes held a cold, calculating gleam every time she spoke to me. Whenever I asked about Marianne, she would avoid my gaze, giving vague excuses like she was hiding something. All I wanted was my phone so I could call Marianne. My phone still wouldn't finish charging, and I couldn't make the call I so desperately needed. Again, I heard hurried footsteps in the hallway when I was sure I was alone. The small contradictions in Sandra's stories only deepened my suspicion. Everything about her screamed danger. And through it all, I couldn't stop thinking about Marianne, the friend who had always been my rock, my support through the hardest times. Now, gone, absent, almost like a lost victim in this tangled story. Why had she disappeared? Was she trying to protect me? Or was something far worse happening to her? My head spun with too many questions, and the only certainty I had left was this: Sandra was not who she claimed to be. But without Marianne, I was alone to uncover the truth. And I feared the truth might be far darker than I could imagine. The day passed, and my worry only grew heavier with each hour. The next morning, as soon as I woke up, I asked Sandra for my phone. She told me the battery was faulty and that my phone wouldn't charge anymore, but she promised to get a new battery soon. My heart sank cold. I knew she was lying. Something terrible was happening. What had she done to Marianne? God, there was something very wrong going on. I tried to pretend I believed her. She brought my coffee as usual and placed it by my bedside. I told her I would drink it in a moment. As soon as she left the room, I got up and poured everything down the sink again. It was a dangerous move. One mistake and she could have walked in, caught me in the act. But I moved fast, heart pounding, hands trembling, and by some miracle, I wasn't caught. That day, once again, the dizziness and weakness eased significantly. I was getting better. 2 days without coffee made an incredible difference. I could feel it clearly. I knew there was something wrong with the breakfast Sandra was giving me. The following day, everything was different. The signs were no longer subtle. No coffee, no vitamins, no sound in the hallway, and no Sandra. For the first time in weeks, the house was eerily silent. Her absence, which had often stirred suspicion in me, now filled me with a different kind of unease. Something had changed. I got out of bed carefully, my body still weak but steadier than the days before. I needed to act. I searched through the old drawers in Richard's office until I found what I was looking for, his old cell phone. Still covered in a thin layer of dust, but intact. With trembling hands, I plugged it in and waited. When the screen finally lit up, the shock hit me like a punch to the stomach. Dozens of unread messages from the bank. Even though Richard had passed away, his number was still registered to receive banking notifications, alerts about transactions, some of absurd amounts, made at times when I was heavily sedated or in deep rest. Transfers, withdrawals, purchases, the whole of more than 2 million. My world collapsed. With great effort, I dialed the bank manager using the emergency number Richard had saved. Upon identifying himself and hearing my frail voice, his tone changed immediately. Mrs. Evelyn, we've been trying to reach you. Did you authorize these withdrawals? There has been heavy activity in the past few weeks, including transfers to foreign accounts. We tried to block them, but since you never responded, we assumed you were traveling abroad and making these transactions. The floor seemed to disappear beneath me. It was at that moment, almost as if choreographed, that Marianne appeared at the front door. She opened it and walked in. I was still very confused. I had just realized Sandra was the one who had made the withdrawals and vanished. But how had Marianne suddenly appeared? What really happened? Still dazed, I hung up the phone and went to hug her. It was so good to see her. She looked beautiful in a black dress. I was thrilled to see her, but deeply confused. We hugged tightly. She walked toward the kitchen and called me. She handed me the bank statements. I began to panic as I looked at all the money taken from my account. But at least I was relieved to see her alive and safe, and to know Sandra hadn't harmed her. What happened? I asked. Marianne poured herself a glass of wine, sat down calmly at the table, looked at me and said, "You were supposed to die, Evelyn. That was the plan. Sandra was hired by me. She never stole anything from you. I paid her to help carry out the scam. And Dr. Halbert, he never existed, just another con artist. Everything was fake. The diagnosis, the treatment, the clinic. The medications were nothing but flower pills. The injections were just saline. You never had cancer, Evelyn. I wanted you to die so I could take your money, especially after you transferred everything into my name." My body froze. She continued with the same icy tone. "Yes, I used your money. I traveled. I let myself live. In just a handful of days, I burned through it like it meant nothing. Private jets, designer boutiques, 5-star suites. champagne at breakfast. I wanted to feel alive one last time, to touch everything I thought I'd never have. Because, well, I have cancer, terminal, liver and bone metastasis. I have a few months left, maybe days or hours. My mind was spinning. That's when I noticed it. My grandmother's pearl necklace, the one that had gone missing, was hanging from her neck. She really had stolen it. I had no idea why. And yes, she said, you started coughing blood because even before the so called treatment, I was already putting warfarin in your coffee. An anticoagulant. In small daily doses, it causes internal bleeding, extreme fatigue, bruising, all the symptoms of advanced cancer. Your coffee was what was going to kill you slowly. Everything else was a medication at all. She took another sip of wine. I needed that money. And you had so much. Richard left you more than enough. But something in you resisted. And I got attached. Part of me hoped you wouldn't die. Strange, isn't it? I wanted to scream, to strike her. But everything inside me was silence. Marianne looked at me with a real, almost human melancholy and said, don't hate me. I just got lost. When I found out I had cancer, it consumed me entirely. I lost myself completely. Days passed. I tried to make sense of it all. Her betrayal, her illness, the fragile thread that still bound us. And through it all, I made a choice. I didn't call the police. Weeks later, I learned Marianne had been hospitalized. She had listed my number as an emergency contact. The cancer was real. She hadn't lied about that. The cancer had advanced. Metastasis had spread. It was terminal. I went to the hospital. I walked into the room not knowing what to say, but I needed to see her. She looked at me, already so fragile and incredibly weak, and she cried, almost without strength. Forgive me, Evelyn. I don't know why I did it. I lost myself. The cancer corroded my body and mind. You were the most beautiful person in my life, she said, tears running down her face. I held her hand for the last time. I already forgave you. I will always love you, I replied. Voice breaking, she smiled, barely strong enough, and whispered, thank you. I love you too. And with a deep, peaceful breath, she was gone. Days blurred in silence and reflection. When the fog of grief finally lifted, I faced the aftermath. Despite all the money she'd wasted, I still had enough. More than enough to live the rest of my life. Richard's photo, the one in the gold frame that had gone missing, stayed on my mind long after things settled. I'd searched the house more than once, convinced I was imagining it, or that it had simply vanished like so much of my life. Weeks later, while organizing the guest room, I found it, tucked beneath the bed, wrapped in an old quilt. Beside it, a folded note in Marianne's handwriting. I couldn't look him in the eye. I'm sorry. I sat on the edge of the bed, holding the note, feeling the weight of all she'd done and everything she couldn't face. She had hidden him, not stolen, not destroyed, just hidden. Even in betrayal, she still felt guilt. My grandmother's pearl necklace, the one she wore the day she confessed, I found days later in a small velvet pouch on my kitchen table. But I understood. She hadn't taken them out of greed, but because they reminded her of me. of who we were before all this, as if that memory gave her the strength to speak the truth. Even in the wreckage, there were pieces of love. And maybe that's why, in the end, I could forgive her. I sold my house. I couldn't bear to stay without my husband, without my best friend. I bought a small, quiet apartment, and I set out to see the world. Not to escape the pain, but to honor the life nearly stolen from me.